This is Hope and Help with Doctors Michelle and Mark Sherwood. Insights and interviews with a dose of straight talk to help you enjoy optimal health in all areas of life.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Hope and Health.
I'm Dr. Michelle.
I'm Dr. Mark, and they like to call us, some do, M&M.
Without the sugar.
Well,
only a special kind of sugar.
That kind of sugar. We always want to do that, right? We are excited to get the opportunity to speak into your lives as always, and appreciate that. We don't take it for granted. We put a lot of information, a lot of thought, and a lot of planning into these episodes. So we hope you get as much out of them as we do. We learn a lot, I guess. So it's been a learning experience with life series, hasn't it?
It has been. You know, you can't change what you don't know.
Yep.
So the more you know about this physical body that's called an organism, the better you can take care of it. So that's been our goal, is to take it all the way down to the cellular level, then build to the tissue level, then into muscular, to go into all the tissues so that we can eventually build an organ and an organ system, and then an organism, which is you and I.
And we have been talking about tissue. And if you remember, we've been talking about these things called connective tissues. And last time we left off, we talked about adipose tissue, soft or loose and dense connective tissues. We talked about blood being a connective tissue.
Yeah,
that was kind of cool.
The blood is a connective tissue. Cells and the white cells.
Yep.
They all come from a progenitor cell in the bone marrow.
Oh my gosh, it gets
Totally cool.
complicated. Well, bottom line is everything comes from a cell, and a cell is the smallest living organism that can live by itself. It's got
Unit of life.
it's got a brain, if you will, kind of like a nucleus, and it's got a power source, the mitochondria, and it has this body, it's developed into this
Protective
membrane.
mechanism.
Yeah, kind of cool. It's fascinating how life works, and for us to believe that just kind of evolved over time without the help of a supernatural mind of a creator. I mean, we're just being pretty stupid, frankly. It takes a lot of faith to believe that, right? It takes more faith to believe that, as I've used this story before, two rocks slammed together, created a cell. The cell was swimming around the ocean for a while, and it's water that was just happened to be there, by the way. And just eventually this cell kind of decided one day it was going to get some fins, right? And it decided, I want some fins because I want to be able to swim faster. I just want to float. So then I decided, I'm not happy in the water. I want to get up on the bank, and I want to get me some legs. So you just need some legs on land that just happened to be there, right? And then the bug, the thing that's now walking around with legs, decided to actually, I want to stand upright eventually. So I'm tired of looking down here at the weeds, and I don't know where the weeds come from, but they're there anyway. And so I want to eventually stand upright. And so because I'm all hairy and now I happen to be an ape, I'm going to climb the tree just because the tree is there. Who knows where the tree come from at the same time, but it's there nonetheless. So I decided to climb the tree. And then at that point, I get tired of being hairy and in a tree, and I decide to shave, get a razor from your neighborhood CVS that you don't know where that came from either. Decide to shave my back, shave my face, shave my arms and my toes, and climb out of the tree, get a lunch pail, and go to work.
Oh, that's right.
That's the story, and I'm sticking to it. So the bottom line is, it's pretty far-fetched to believe that, isn't it? So we want to really begin our idea and our concept of this idea from what we're doing right now, from really understanding the cells and really understanding what they do. And we'll kind of begin right here with this idea. Remember, we talked about this last time, this idea of bone. And bone was fascinating because we had the osteoblastic and osteoclastic, right? Too many osteoclasts compared to osteoblasts is what condition?
Osteopenia or osteoporosis, which is a severe form of bone disease.
Yep. And so from a connective tissue standpoint, we will go from bone all the way over here to muscle, where we see three types of muscle: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac muscle. And we'll spend some time talking about each during this episode.
Take a look at that slide. Just for your information, muscle tissue is composed of cells that have a very special ability to shorten or contract in order to produce movement of body parts. And the tissue is highly cellular, meaning it contains a lot of cells, and it's supplied very well with blood vessels. Now, the cells are long and they're slender, and oftentimes they're called muscle fibers. And these are usually arranged in bundles or layers that are surrounded by that connective tissue that we've talked about. You should be familiar with this from our last episode of connective tissues. Actin and myosin are the contractile proteins of muscle tissue. Now, integrated actions occur at joints with the bones and the skeletal muscles to produce obvious movements such as walking, running. These are properties of muscle. Skeletal muscles also produce more subtle movements that result in various, like facial expressions, eye movements, digestive processes, and respiration. Now, in addition to movement, muscle contractions also fulfill some other very important muscle functions in your body, such as joint stability and even heat production. Posture, such as sitting and standing, is maintained as a result of muscle contraction. Now, the skeletal muscles are continually making fine adjustments that hold your body in stationary positions. The tendons of many muscles extend over the joints, and in this way, they contribute to a form of joint stability. This is particularly evident around areas of the knees and your shoulder joints, where muscle tendons are a major factor in stabilizing the joint. The heat production to maintain your body temperature is an important byproduct of muscle metabolism. Now, nearly 85% of the heat produced in your body is a result of muscle contraction. So remember, we talked about a non-exercise induced thermogenesis, where that's just your body at rest. Now, when you actually move your muscles, you're actually going to produce even more heat.
So therefore, exercise does indeed do a body good. So those, just a brief intro to those three different types of muscle. Right?
And specifically, there's skeletal muscle, there's smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. And we're going to go through each specific type of muscle, the location, the types of cells, and the histology.
There you go. You see the three types there: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac, right? And so just very briefly, just kind of talk, sweetheart, about just a super brief explanation of the skeletal, smooth, and cardiac muscles.
Well, skeletal muscles, which we just talked about, it helps you pick up your laundry, it helps you get dressed, and it aids with our activities of daily living. The smooth muscles, this is the type that lines your organs and organ systems. For example, the smooth muscle lines digestive systems, and it allows for that action, peristalsis, which actually helps move food from the oral cavity towards the exit into your plumbing, also known as the toilet. The cardiac muscle, this type of muscle performs a pumping action. It sits right in the center of your chest, and it's also known as your heart muscle, a very specialized, highly integrated type of muscle.
So those are the three types of muscles we have, and obviously we're going to talk about, first of all, this thing called skeletal muscle. And you know, the skeletal muscle is one of these things that certainly kind of freaks people out a little bit, because we carry a lot of skeletal muscle. Why do we carry skeletal muscle? Because it actually helps move bones. Imagine that. So,
well, and muscle is agility. Awesome muscle is frailty, and frailty is a disease.
And the less we move, the closer we are to rigor mortis. So you got to maintain muscle tissue. This is especially important as we age, because we actually lose about 0.5 pound of lean muscle tissue every year from about the age of 25 going forward. Did you know that that correlates well with about 0.5% loss in your metabolism? What you just talked about was very important, because you talked about the heat, or this thermogenesis. 85% of our body heat or thermogenic activity is driven by muscle movement. So pretty cool. So we want to think about this when we think about the idea of muscles. So the more you move, the better you are. The more you move, the more you live. And the more you move, the more heat you could generate, which is a good thing. So let's kind of dive into these idea of muscles and start off with this thing we call skeletal muscle.
So skeletal muscle is striated when you look at it under a microscope. The slide that you see there is looking at a bicep muscle. Now the muscle fibers are straight in vertical bands. The horizontal striations, there's lighter and darker bands that are visible result from the differences in the composition and the density along the fibrils within the cell. The cigar-like dark patches that you actually see there beside the myofibers, that's actually the muscle cell nuclei. Remember? That's where the DNA of the cell lives. Skeletal muscle fibers are cylindrical in nature. They're multinucleated. They're striated. Those are the stripes that you see. And they are contractile in nature. And they're under voluntary control, meaning that you actually have conscious control of the actions of those muscles, unlike smooth muscles that you don't have direct conscious control over. They're actually called involuntary muscle, and cardiac muscle is different. It's also not under voluntary control.
Obviously, when you think of all these muscles, there's ones that actually require your thought process or your initiative process. I want to raise my arm up. That's what my brain, it sends a signal down the nerves all the way to the muscles, so the muscles will respond. And then there's things that happen just breathing. I mean, think about that. We don't think about that. Or the heart pumping, we don't think about that. It's what we do. So as we talk about these different muscle tissues, we want you to think about these as well. So you can maybe take our little commercial break here, a little message break. You can actually get up and move. So see if you can get up right now and think about your decision to get up as a voluntary skeletal muscle movement. And then think about your heart and your breathing and your eyes blinking and all that as a involuntary. So keep those thoughts alive and stay right with us. We'll be right back.
This is absolutely not protein powder.
This is Kingdom Fuel, our complete nutritional shake mix. Kingdom Fuel provides a full spectrum of vitamins, minerals, proteins, carbohydrates, and fats to fuel your body, your life, so that you can enjoy health and peace of mind.
Hi friends, Dr. Mark Sherwood here.
And I'm Dr. Michelle Sherwood.
Not everyone can make an appointment with us, but you can receive many of the same educational benefits our patients receive through our most comprehensive course, Health Secrets Exposed.
Modern healthcare, or should we say sick care, is more focused on profit than your health. And in this course, you'll discover what sick care has been keeping from you all along.
Here's a hint. You don't need more medication.
You need the simple truths in this course to unlock optimal health. Health Secrets Exposed is usually $149. Now it's just $99 with your promo code. It's time for you to learn what Big Pharma doesn't want you to know. Go to Sherwood.tv now and use promo code HOPEHEALTH to receive this exclusive offer.
We're back. Thank you so much for joining us. We're talking about this idea of skeletal muscle. We've been talking about these connective tissues, and now we're getting into the muscle tissues, and there's three, skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. And we just kind of began our discussion on the idea of a skeletal muscle. So we're going to continue that right now because that's just an amazing topic of discussion. And so let's jump right back into where we were, shall we?
We shall. So as we talked about skeletal muscle under microscopic view, skeletal muscle is broadly classified into two types of fibers. Type 1 is slow twitch, and type 2 is fast twitch muscle. Type 1 slow twitch, slow oxidative or red muscle is very dense with capillaries. That's a blood supply. And it's also very rich in mitochondria and a muscle protein called myoglobin, giving the muscle tissue its characteristic red color. It can carry more oxygen and sustain aerobic types of activity.
So let's think about that for a moment. More type 1, more aerobic potential, more carrying of oxygen. So that would be sort of the muscle that's mainly used when you have aerobic type activity, like a long jog or maybe a long bike ride.
Type 2 or fast twitch muscle has three major kinds that are in order of increasing contractile speed. Type 2A, which is like slow muscle, is aerobic. It's rich in mitochondria, so lots of energy, and capillaries, blood supply, and appears red when it's deoxygenated, meaning that they do lose the oxygen. Type 2B, which is less dense in mitochondria and myoglobin, this is the fastest muscle type in humans. It can contract more quickly and with a greater amount of force than oxidative muscle, but can sustain only short anaerobic bursts of activity before muscle contraction becomes painful, often incorrectly attributed to the buildup of what's called lactic acid. It's not able to go through that whole transformation to produce energy as the end product. So this is the major fast twitch muscle type, explaining the pale color of their flesh. Type 2X fibers primarily use anaerobic glycolysis as their ATP source. They're white and pale fibers in nature. They have a very large diameter and possess high amounts of glycogen, which is actually used in glycolysis to make ATP quickly to produce a high level of tension. So type 2 fibers are used for very short duration, high intensity bursts of power, such as maximal or near maximal lifts or short sprints. And your body will use type 1 muscle fibers, also known as slow twitch muscle fibers, during a prolonged, slow, steady state of exercise that requires endurance, like a 10K run or a long leisurely bike ride.
And so a good way to remember this is type 1, type 2, sort of short repetition weight training or something like that.
Type
Right?
2X?
That's going to be a little bit with type 2X. Yeah, a mix kind of between the type 1 and type 2. So, most people are born with a preference of type 1 or type 2. And not everybody, but there are people out there that sort of have the, I don't know, maybe they have a tendency, they don't look like a runner, but they can go out and run a 5K without even working at it. And there's people that don't look like a weightlifter, but can go in a gym and pick up 300 pounds. And there's people that sort of can do both, which is kind of a rare thing. And there's people extraordinarily strong that have an inordinate amount of maybe type 2 fibers, or maybe some people have extraordinary amount of ability to run a distance, a lot of type 1. So we're all made differently. And of course, genes determining most of that. You can train and you can get some transition of type 1 to type 2 or type 2 to type 1. But generally speaking, we have what we have. And so we have these propensities and tendencies, though. So it's good to maintain that muscle, though. Keep it going, whatever you do.
That's right. If you don't train at all, you're going to become weak.
No question. We don't want to become weak at all. We want to become very, very strong. And so let's talk about the smooth muscle now, because the smooth muscle is a little different than the skeletal muscle, but it's nonetheless very, very important.
Yes, and we talked about smooth muscle is involuntary. It's not striated. There's no sarcomeres, so there's no striations or band-like stripes, such as skeletal muscle. It's divided into two subgroups. You see a single unit there and a multi-unit smooth muscle. Smooth muscle cells are spindle-shaped, and they have a very one single centrally located nucleus. They're called involuntary muscles. They're found in the walls of hollow organs, including the stomach, the intestines, the bladder, and the walls of passageways such as blood and lymph vessels, and even in the tracts of the respiratory, urinary, and reproductive systems. In fact, in the eyes, the ciliary muscles is a type of smooth muscle that dilates and contracts the iris and actually alters the shape of the lens and how much light that eye is going to let in. In the skin, smooth muscle cells, such as those that are in what's called the erector pili, actually make the hair stand on end in response to cold temperatures.
Or fear.
Or fear. So single unit smooth muscle, commonly called the visceral muscle, is in hollow organs. The multi-unit smooth muscle is found mostly in large blood vessels in the airways.
There you go. Smooth muscle is important. We'll talk about that later on. We talk about the heart because it has a bunch of smooth muscle. Couple little kind of ideas of definitions here for you.
So if you think about, like all muscle tissue, the function of smooth muscle is simply to contract. And this image above shows how actin and myosin fibers shorten effectively to shrink the cell.
There you go. So now we got a little definition of that. Now,
The smooth muscles can also be divided into different types. And really, when you look at the different types, you kind of see relaxed and contracted here, but a little bit more explanation, sweetheart.
Yeah, and where are they? They're in the walls of hollow visceral organs, the liver, the pancreas, the intestines, and they appear spindle-shaped and are also involuntary. You can see when they're relaxed or long. When they contract, they shorten. And those are due to the filaments that are actually inside of them. And smooth muscles compose of sheets of strands of smooth muscles, and these cells have fibers of actin and myosin, which run through the cells and are supported by a framework of other proteins that aid in their contractions.
And notice you'll see there in the cells, there's a nucleus. And so going back to our basic idea of the formation of the organ is it's got a bunch of cells that have nucleuses in them or nuclei, and then has a bunch of them bonded together, different types to form different tissues. In this case, it's a smooth muscle tissue, which happens to be a connective tissue. So now we talked about that. I think it's time to look at the kind of a unique one that we all understand is going to be this idea of cardiac tissue. Cardiac tissue is something that we would have really around kind of the heart and the heart muscle. And again, we'll talk about the heart later on in a future episode, but this smooth muscle is really important around the cardiac.
Yeah. Smooth muscle is the type of muscle tissue that is held together with connective tissues.
Yep.
And smooth muscle, the intestines are close to the cardiac muscle, which sits in the center of your chest. And the cardiac muscle is unique in that it is also involuntary, and it's got its own little pacemaker inside of the cell that is what helps your heart pump blood. So cardiac muscle tissue is only found in your heart, and it works to keep your heart pumping through that involuntary action. This is one feature that differentiates it from skeletal muscle tissue, which you can control. The cardiac muscle does it through those specialized cells called pacemaker cells, and these control the contractions of your heart.
So here goes the heart. Let's talk about what's unique about cardiac muscle.
It has, the muscles are a branching morphology and have a presence of these intercalated discs found between the muscle fibers. Another distinct feature is that they have their own rhythmicity. Unlike smooth or skeletal muscles, which require nervous input for contraction, the cardiac fibers actually have their own pacemaker cells called the sinoatrial node. That's number 1 there on the slide. The SA node that spontaneously depolarizes. And it's in the wall of the right atrium near the opening of the superior vena cava.
Now, when you say depolarize, explain that to our folks.
Well, it's like an electrical charge when certain ions cross over the cell membranes. It causes a depolarization, which creates an action to go from the SA node. It's then going to go from the AV node there in the heart. Then it's also going to travel down through that septum that separates the two chambers. You see that it's called the atrioventricular bundle, or the bundle of His. And then it actually triggers it up both sides of the ventricle. It's those yellow lines that you see in that heart there that actually create the contraction and the rhythmicity of the heart.
Well, the heart is super complicated, but it also is reason why it's so darn important, because man, without the heart, we are dead. So let's keep all that in mind, folks. Boy, this is a lot of information we know, but we want you to understand the awesomeness of God, how he created us. I used that story at the beginning of our show about how, with the little cell deciding to grow fins one day. Honestly, that's not how it happened. God made everything in a unique order. And so this order is being played out and laid out and explained throughout this series called the Life Series. So we really, really hope you're enjoying this. We'll pick this back up next time. Anything you missed, go back and listen to those previous episodes, because they're super important. Because when you start putting it all together, you just want to take better care of this thing called the temple, right?
That's right. Do things that do a body good. They will help your long-term longevity so that you can continue to spread hope, health, and healing to the world.
All right, don't be a hope leader. We'll see you next time.
Doctors Mark and Michelle Sherwood and their clinic can help you find the hope and health you were created to enjoy. Go to sherwood.tv for clear, proven ways you can be healthier. Subscribe at sherwood.tv